Hi everyone, and welcome to another TalentLyft webinar. Today we will talk about remote hiring, and I hope you are excited as I am. I can see a lot of you are here with us live. Please feel free to type in something on the chat. You can see it on the right side of your screen, so we know you are here. Today, we will start talking about remote hiring. My name is Anya Zojčevska. I'm a recruitment marketing specialist and head of marketing at recruitment software company TalentLyft. And I'm very excited to welcome our guest speakers. Here with me are Scott and Thomas. Scott is a director of customer success at tech recruitment software Codility. And Thomas is a recruiting lead at finleap. Finleap is a fintech company, one of the biggest in Europe, but you will hear more about the company, both of those companies later from our guest speakers. Just a few introductions, so you know what will we be talking about. Today, we will start with a short introduction about remote work. And after that, Scott will share best practices for remote hiring. And next, Thomas will share his experience of remote hiring. And he will give you practical tips that will help you implement remote hiring process at your own company. But before we start, just a few technical remarks. I can see that you discovered the chat. Thank you for introducing yourself. Hi, everyone, once again. If you happen to experience any kind of technical issues, in the beginning of the chat, I placed a link. So please click on the link and follow the instructions there. The webinar will last for about half an hour, and after that we will have a Q&A session. But please feel free to ask questions during the whole time of the webinar. Besides the chat bar, you have the questions bar, so please type in your questions there. I would really like to make this webinar interactive, so please feel free to introduce yourself, comment, chat, ask any questions that you would like us to answer, and also share best practices so we can all learn from each other. Okay, I see a lot of highs here in the chat. So hi, everyone, and welcome once again. Okay, there are 150 of us live and still more people coming in. So I think we can start with our webinar. First, a short introduction about remote work. So the question is remote work and, of course, remote hiring here to stay? In the past few months, we have all experienced remote work. So the question is, how will this change the future of work? Is remote work here to stay? So let's see what people say. Gallup has done a very interesting research where they asked employees if they would like to continue working remotely after the pandemic. And as you can see here, almost 60% of employees would like to continue working remotely after the pandemic. So what do you as HR professionals say about remote work? I would really like to know. Here there is a stat from research that asked HR professionals if they also would like to continue working remotely after the COVID-19, and the numbers are quite the same. As you can see, a lot of HR professionals also want to continue working remotely. So I would like to hear from you. So I will start a poll now, and you can share with us if you would also like to work remotely. I believe now you will be able to see the poll. Okay. So how will companies respond to this? So more than half of employees want to continue working remotely. What will companies do? It seems that companies are well aware that people want to work remotely, and almost 2/3 of companies expect that at least some of their employees will continue to working remotely after the pandemic. Here are a few examples of famous companies embracing work from home. You probably heard that Twitter has allowed their employees to work from home forever. Facebook and Google are also continuing with remote work after the pandemic. Microsoft also said that remote work is here to stay. So what is the reason behind this? Why are these big companies embracing remote work? And it's not just because they are famous tech companies and they want to be cool. They are very well aware of many benefits of the remote work. So here we have top 4 proven benefits of remote work. If you introduce remote work to a company, this can help you find and hire great candidates easier. It can help you retain them, keep them productive, and save money. So let's look at some stats that confirm this. So when it comes to recruitment, remote work enables you, of course, to have an unlimited pool of talent. So if you allow remote work, you can hire people from anywhere in the world. Besides that, here is a very interesting stat that I think it's worth mentioning, and that is that 54% of office workers would be willing to quit their job for the one that allows them to work remotely. So this is very important to keep in mind. Besides that, companies that encourage remote work have a 25% lower turnover. So this is also very important. You can keep your people easier. And here is, of course, the stat about productivity. Most of employees confirmed improved productivity while working from home. This is very often question that we heard here about productivity. Many employers are worried that their employees won't be as productive when they're working from home, but this is not true. And this has been confirmed with in many different research, starting from the famous Stanford study almost 5 years ago, then a CISPA study, also many different scientifically validated academic research from Harvard, Gallup, and so on have confirmed that actually employees who work from home are even more productive. So this is also very important to know. And finally, remote work allows you to lower your costs. Of course, you will save money on the office bills, equipment, and so on. But also another very important thing that you might not be thinking about, and this stat shows it, is that almost a third of employees would choose the ability to work remotely over a pay raise. So this is also very important because you can save money in this way as well. So there are many benefits of remote work, obviously, and people want to continue working remotely. So remote work is definitely a very important new trend, and you as HR professionals and recruiters should definitely be well versed in remote hiring. And this is our topic today. And now Scott will let you in on all the secrets and best practices of remote hiring. Are you ready, Scott?
I am, yeah. Thank you, Anna. Really appreciate you hosting this and being here today. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Loftin. I am the Director of Customer Success here at Codility. So Codility actually works with 1,500 customers globally, and we really help technical recruiters, talent acquisition, HR professionals, engineering managers across the spectrum really solve for finding the best available talent through our platform of online assessments. And so I've had the pleasure of working Codility for a few months. I actually started right before the pandemic started, so was kind of a little bit of a guinea pig, and our company actually went fully remote soon after. And so I have the experience of kind of going through a virtual onboarding experience, which I'll talk a little bit about in today's session. A little bit of quick background and bio around myself. So I have about 20 years experience working in customer-facing roles in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, working with tech companies and a lot of folks in helping solve technical issues and problems. A little bit of personal items around me. I'm a big fan of cooking. Excited to do some barbecuing this weekend for Father's Day, and I love to be outdoors, and specifically, I love to run. So a little bit about me. So let's kind of jump into it. So, so when I started about 3 or 4 months ago, the world's really kind of changed, right? And so we really started at Codility leaning into the remote first, pretty much everything around the messaging and what we wanted to provide to our customers from a leadership standpoint. And so we've been hosting a lot of virtual forums with HR professionals and recruiters, hiring managers, and just trying to help people figure out what this new world really looks like, right? And so, and I think there was a lot of uncertainty in those first few weeks leading back to, mid-March to early April, where there was kind of a little bit of a panic, right, around trying to figure out, gosh, everyone's remote now. How does this impact our hiring process and our practices? And, how are we going to be able to move forward through this? And after those first few weeks kind of wore off, I think people took a step back and realized, gosh, we've been doing a lot of this already. Most organizations had, virtual hiring processes already kind of in place. And so it was really around, establishing and looking at what folks already had done and kind of building upon that to really map this kind of new world around their virtual hiring process. And so we've heard from customers, Fortune 500 customers to smaller customers, and there's a lot of different themes that kind of came out of these conversations and best practices that I'm going to go ahead and share with you right now. And so over the course of these dialogues and discussions over the past several weeks, we've kind of boiled it down to 6 main themes or topics that we've really kind of focused in on and heard from our customers. Number 1 is starting with empathy and transparency. This sounds like common sense type of material, but you really need to double down on that in light of what's going on in the environment. So if you're a recruiting professional, talent acquisition, hiring manager across the board, make sure that you're very self-aware of what's going on with your candidates, right? We're all kind of navigating this kind of structure together. And so making sure that, hey, listen, like, have they just lost their position at their prior company and, they're navigating a new opportunity with your organization? Are they, do they have kids? Do they have, personal obligations that are kind of happening in the background? Do they understand your technology that you're going to use to recruit, right? So really taking a step back and maybe asking some additional questions as a recruiter that you normally wouldn't ask, just because you want to be able to go the extra mile to make that candidate feel a little bit more at ease and at home, right? And then transparency kind of falls in line with that. And actually, transparency is a theme that you're going to see consistently throughout some of these slides that I have. Again, I think doubling down on that from a communication standpoint, we've seen recruiters pretty much eliminate the phone screen. They want to have more face time naturally with the candidate. They're not going to be able to bring them on site anymore. In particular, in the technical recruitment space, where hiring managers on the engineering side really want to bring a candidate on site, and we're so used to that concept of being able to get a software engineer to go in and do some whiteboarding on the background, interact with them, of course, make sure that a culture fit is there as well. And now that's got to be done over the internet. So it's a little bit challenging, right? So making sure that you're explaining the process, you're getting the candidate thoroughly comfortable, and you're walking them through everything bit by bit, all the way through, from the time you source them, all the way through to that offer, and actually beyond. Because it doesn't just stop there, once you get the offer. it's a virtual onboarding experience. And so they're probably going to want to understand what that looks like. How do I interact with my manager? What does that first few weeks look like? Are you guys going to give me the necessary equipment that I need to be able to be successful in a remote virtual type of environment? So make sure that you're actually doubling down and thinking through those themes as you're doing your recruitment process. Secondly, this goes hand in hand. Identify and promote your company's culture. This is probably the most difficult thing to convey in a virtual environment is, your company's values and your company's ability to, promote that culture. We've seen some really innovative ideas, and actually I have to lean in here and give Codility a hand. We do things like virtual get-togethers. We do virtual lunches. We do virtual happy hours. We actually have a trivia night tonight, so a company trivia night where we all get together on Zoom and there's a coordinated game. Prepare to give some of those insights to your candidates. Give them some perspective of how you're still going to be able to emphasize culture across the board, right? I think that's super important to do that. We've seen organizations like LiveRamp actually go as far as saying, hey, listen, let's figure out what our office actually looked like and how we would actually bring a candidate into our office, and then figure out how to translate that now to a virtual experience. So I can give a candidate a virtual tour essentially of our office and give them that look and feel of, maybe we do go back to an office environment in the near future, and this is kind of what it would look like. And that actually gives some additional, insight to the culture and to the company, to the candidate, to make them feel a little bit more comfortable along the way. And that actually dovetails really nicely into 3 on that candidate experience. If you're doing 1 and 2 really, really well, that's going to get you a really long way in terms of your process of making a candidate feel really good about making a move, right? There's a lot of uncertainty right now in the marketplace. And again, making a candidate feel really special during this time and getting them really comfortable to make that leap in an uncertain economic environment is absolutely imperative. And so make sure that you're doing those things, extra check-ins, if you could check in more via, phone and via, technology, that's probably better than a traditional email. And so making sure that you're, again, creating that environment that's really warm and welcoming for that candidate. And then number 4 here, it goes the other way too. A lot of recruiters, and this is new for you guys too, recruiters, hiring managers, walk through and understand that, the old model is getting blown up now, right? And so it's going to take some time to, get used to that change. And so we've had customers, I was talking to a CTO yesterday that reinvented their recruitment process and actually is putting his hiring managers and the talent acquisition team through kind of a mini virtual boot camp to get them aligned with the right questions to ask in a virtual type of remote environment to candidates and really create a better type of experience. So relook, have some meetings around this. Are we doing the right things in this process in a virtual environment to make this the right type of experience for the candidate, but also for me as a hiring manager or recruiter, have I actually adapted in the right capacity as well? And then that leads us to number 5. You've got to be using the right type of technology, and also make sure your candidate is well prepared to use the technology that you're using to interview. So for instance, a lot of folks are on Zoom, but some organizations use Blue Jeans or another type of video communication provider. Really, really make sure that your candidate understands how to use that technology beforehand. Again, going back to that experience. And then remote hiring is just a first step, right? Like you get them to offer onboarding, you're going to have to give them some sort of perspective and plan around how you're going to continue this across the board. So these are kind of the 6 core best practices we've really heard from customers. And then I want to kind of get into, so Codility, again, we're taking a really strong stance around the future of hiring. And so there's 3 core themes that I want to go over here. One is future of hiring is really unbiased. So the data kind of really bears this out. in terms of, job seekers want to see an organization that reflects diversity, right? And if you're not an organization that's doing that, you're probably going to lose out on some top talent, just bar none, right? So again, make sure that you guys internally are kind of looking through the process here and making sure that, what you as a spouse, as an organization has values, as core values, is really mapping to what the candidates want. And one of those things is and what we're seeing in the data showing is really candidates want to understand how you create a warm, unbiased environment. Codility actually itself is using technology right now that we're going to be deploying to help create a more seamless, a more unbiased situation through the technical recruitment assessment process right now. So we're not just walking the walk, we're going to be talking the talk a little bit as well. The next thing is, this should be pretty apparent. It's the future of hiring is digital. Pretty much all candidates, if you're using, video and other new forms of technology through the process, I almost think I want to say they're expecting it now, and you have to have it set up. And if you're not, you got to get on that train immediately and make sure that you are activating, the digital side of communication, the digital side of interviewing across the board. And then also making sure that, again, you're doing the proper types of training internally and externally to make that a seamless connection across the recruitment process. And then finally, again, here comes transparency throughout the entire process, right? So ensuring the candidate feels comfortable doing check-ins prior, after the interview, maybe doing a virtual coffee with them. I've seen some organizations do that. But across the board, candidates really want to, regardless of whether you hire them or not, that you're fulfilling that obligation and due diligence to make sure that you're providing them adequate communication and transparency throughout the process. And so there's a lot of forums out there, and the last thing that you want to do is have a negative experience tied to a digital form and kind of have that out there. You really want to make sure that even if a candidate is not a right fit, they're communicating back to them, not in some sort of generic template. Try to make a conversation over the phone for 5 or 10 minutes. That goes a really long way. And also give them some insight into what worked and what didn't work. I think that will put you as an organization a couple notches above in terms of your ability to properly recruit, properly communicate, and properly, establish a really clear vision of what you guys are trying to do. And I think that is it for me. So again, hopefully this is helpful, and really, really excited to have been able to communicate this to you guys today. I'll turn it over to Thomas.
Thank you, Scott. This was very interesting. We have already a few questions here, but I would like to move on with Thomas, because I believe we will answer a few of them now. Thomas has prepared his presentation, so he will also answer a few of the questions you already asked. So let's move on with that, and after that we will still have time to answer all your questions. So Thomas, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks a lot, Anya.
Okay, great. So Thomas, please tell us something about yourself and introduce yourself, your company, your experience.
Sure. Thanks again. And hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me. As you can see there from the intro and from this slide, I'm Tom or Thomas, sitting here in Berlin, currently working for finleap. finleap is quite an interesting company. If you've never heard of this kind of thing, it's a company builder who focuses on building fintech and insurtech companies. So we build startups all the way from ideation to kind of letting them get more and more kind of larger scale and independent from us. But we really focus on helping them very much in that build stage, which is the first 2 or 3 years. I've been here for about 3.5 years. In that time, I had the pleasure of building up 6 startups all the way from scratch and continuing to develop some of the startups that FinLeap had before then. So we've grown from something like 350 to 1,100 people in my time here. Before that, I was working in my native London, where I was supporting more enterprise customers, actually, funnily enough, also in the insurance sector with their recruiting, but in Berlin, obviously looking for something a little bit more startup oriented. I think it's worth pointing out that largely my experience has been quite in the middle between remote and on-site hiring. So this transition that we've gone through recently was nothing strange to me anyway, but I'm looking forward to telling you a bit more about the journey that FinLeap went through over the last few months since we were on lockdown and everything else.
Okay. Okay, I have a few questions for you, Thomas, but I just wanted to let you know that we have a great audience here. They thanked you, Scott, and told you were great, so just so you know. Okay. Okay, so Thomas, I'm wondering, and I'm sure most of our audience is also wondering, how did you support your hiring managers and your team with transition to remote hiring? Because for some people, this is a completely new thing. So how did you help them jump in on the remote hiring and so suddenly? Do you have any tips here?
Yeah, totally. I think it's important to say that we have 2 camps. We have typically the kind of tech and product and design hiring managers that are very used to hiring digitally because the talent market is more global. And then we have the more business-sided ones where in Berlin, we might need German speakers, so they're more used to hiring in person. So we had 2 camps, but we already had some experience of hiring remotely and some tips and tricks that we were using there. So what we really did initially was really build out a more remote-friendly interview training. We've rolled this out to quite a lot of hiring managers already, and we'll continue to do so. We already do interview training, it's important to say, but we've took it and made it a lot more friendly towards hiring remotely. So some of these tips that I'll say that we told the hiring managers sound obvious if you're interviewing all the time, but if you're not, especially for a hiring manager who's quite new to this, it's actually very, very useful. So when people are starting their interviews, it's really important to take the time to set the scene, provide an icebreaker, make sure the candidate is comfortable. You've got to remember that the candidate hasn't had a tour around your office. They haven't seen the team. They haven't had that time to kind of get the feet on the ground. It's launching into a call and straight into trying to get the best out of them. So really informing your hiring manager to try and set the scene and make that candidate as successful as possible is a key intention at the start of the call. Throughout the call, remember that there's no body language. Everything is in your face. Everything is in your tone of voice. Everything is in the way that you interact for your webcam. And again, if you're not smiling, if you're not reacting facially, if you're not looking into the camera, if you're not providing any kind of sensory clues, the candidate and you will not have the same kind of conversation that you'd have in person. So try and be, like we said earlier, kind of oversharing in that regard. Remember that your tone of voice is important. It might be important to talk slower, make sure the candidate understands. Be aware that you might need to accentuate your warmth and personality because, again, there's a bit of a blocker between you and the candidate. And remembering that typical techniques like mirroring to try and get the more out of a candidate or trying to get the more out of a conversation, like leaning in if you want to dive deeper into something, doesn't quite work. So again, using those verbal cues to dive deeper is super important. Deepening empathy, you spoke about it earlier, Scott. If the kids walk in the background or the doorbell rings, this shouldn't detract from your candidate. You've got to remember that they are dealing with a situation that was forced on them in many regards or that they're not used to. So don't let that take away from them. And just like if there's a technical issue, share that problem. Maybe make a joke about the fact that we all have a home setup that maybe isn't as good as our professional setup, and it isn't their fault and shouldn't detract from them. When it comes to changes to our interview process, for some newer hiring managers to this world, we've actually doubled the length of the interviews. It allows more time for getting to know each other, to introduce, and a bit more leeway for technical difficulties. We have had a few opportunities where the hiring manager couldn't connect for the first 5 or 10 minutes. Obviously, it's not the best candidate experience and something that we are, of course, working on, but at least by doubling the amount of time, that doesn't take away from the interview and you can still get the opportunity to sell your brand, to sell your supervisor if that's what the interview is about, or at least sell a bit more personality that you have in that interview. After the training, we also provide interview toolkits, something as a reference point that they can always reference after that. And we do get good feedback that having something to check, a quick sheet to look up for the interview is really useful for our hiring managers.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott. Thomas, sorry. Okay, so how did you adjust the candidate assessment process to be fully remotely? For tech candidates, this is maybe more usual practice, but what did you do with the rest of your candidates, and how did you make it completely remote?
Yeah, so I think it goes without saying that we use video technology, Zoom, Hangouts, Skype. It's really depending on maybe the country of the candidate that we're speaking with. Some don't have access to Google tools, for example. So being a bit flexible with your tooling can help you to get a wider audience with your interviews. We are a customer of Codility, it just so happens. And that's obviously helped us on the tech side. And we didn't have 100% adoption with our hiring managers, but actually the Corona situation and the forcing to be at home, we now have 100% adoption within our technical hiring managers with Codility for reviewing tech candidates. But we've also adopted more technologies when it comes to other competencies. For example, leadership, where we have now implemented an online self-assessment leadership tool. You can kind of build out your leadership profile, send it to a candidate. And the benefits of this is that it's fully remote. The candidate can do it at home in their own time. The speed is very quick because you get an automated response at the end of it. And from that, when we spend the time in an interview, and like I said before, the time you get with them in a video call can often feel a bit pressured and like you don't have enough of it. This allows you to really focus on the key bits. Maybe you just focus on the weaker bits, or you just validate the strengths that come out of that self-assessment. And really what you're trying to do is maximize the time you have with those candidates. For other roles that aren't leadership, the same tool that we have, it's actually it's a German tool that we got to know over the last few months. They can also assess other competencies as well, and we're building it into other roles that aren't just leadership to assess things like, for example, stress resistance or collaboration. They're all little competencies that are part of that kind of tool. If you're interested in hearing more than happy to discuss that after the presentation. For candidate presentations, often what we do in our kind of roles where we're building new companies and we need to see how people would maybe launch a new product in a new market, we often do that in a presentation followed by a discussion in a group. And that's not so easy digitally, but Zoom offers a function where you can do a presentation, of course, but also an annotation function, which is super useful if you're doing a group discussion and you're trying to highlight particular areas. And we've been utilizing that a lot in our group presentation interviews. Other than that, we've been giving candidates a bit more time to prepare. Not everyone is used to presenting remotely. It will take a bit of a time to ramp up, and we know that. We want to get the best out of those candidates. So especially if they have less experience, give them a bit more time or a few more days than you usually would to prepare. And I think Scott mentioned this too about engagement within the recruiting team. We are basically there at the beginning and end of every interview. Our recruiting assistant, Nick, is basically making sure they connect and making sure they disconnect correctly. Therefore, we know very quickly if there's any technical problems. We then reconnect with the candidate and the hiring manager afterwards to make sure everybody got the most out of the interview. And if they didn't, then we can pick up on those things and pass it through to the next interview.
Okay, thank you. So finally, onboarding, the questions you've been all been waiting for. So how does your onboarding look like now when it's completely remote? We have a lot of questions about this, so feel free to go into more details.
Sure, I do my absolute best, and if I don't cover everything, I'm sure we could put it in the discussion afterwards. All this information comes from basically a retrospective that we did across our recruiting and people ops team, who got together to review how did we do over the last few months. So it's a lot of content, but it's not necessarily exhaustive, and certainly something I'd like to discuss more. Scott mentioned that a lot of companies are already quite digital, more than they maybe knew that they were. And I think that's what we discovered with our onboarding process. You know, when we are bringing people on in their first day, and we usually sit everyone in the room so that they can meet other new starters, and we're presenting a lot of useful information about the company, we move that online very easily. Again, using tools like Zoom, you can share your screen or do a presentation mode, and they can have that same presentation. All of the useful links, or that you might give them in a hard copy when you start, and you get a leaflet giving you all the useful information to take away with you. We can also put that online. That's so easy to host. It's very simple. And in fact, we were able to do that within very quickly if it wasn't already online when we started. And then when they're wanting to meet their team members, I think this is something where you need to be careful, because some teams are better at it than others. But if you can support your teams with virtual meet and greets, virtual team events, helping that candidate to connect with the people that it's important to, and giving your internal teams a little push and a gentle nudge to really engage with that, we certainly recommend doing that. Like I say, some teams are very good at it and some teams just aren't so practiced at it and therefore need a bit of a push. Some of the biggest challenges that we've been dealing with are the questions that come from candidates. Things like, you hired me to work in Berlin. When should I relocate? Or can I get a visa at the moment? Is the visa or the immigration service, are they open and will we get a visa? And these are questions which, to be honest, usually we know all the answers to. We can give very clear instructions and we haven't had any problem with. But in the last few months, of course, this has all been turned around and we don't have the answer. I think it's important to say to your new starters that you're there, you're committed to them, you will do whatever you can to bring them to the right location where they're going to be starting, if they're starting as a physical location, and just say we don't have the usual power or influence that we usually do, but like I say, we will see this out to the end. We so far haven't had anyone who hasn't been able to at least start, and obviously we're working with them over time to get them to Berlin eventually. And we're very patient with that. And of course, we're not pressuring candidates or new starters to do things they're not comfortable with. If they don't feel comfortable moving to Berlin and flying in the current situation, even if there's flights available, for us, it doesn't really matter. We're happy for them to wait. We will work on a kind of hybrid model of some remote, some in the office, and that's absolutely fine with us. You can talk through the different options available to them. A lot of people moving to Berlin don't know how the process works, of course, and usually we talk through the different options available to them. But oversharing, over-communicating, making sure that you are clear, supportive, and consultative with your candidates and new starters will, of course, take the pressure away from them and put it all on the company, which I think is the right dynamic to have. So there's a lot of things that we've been doing when it comes to the actual onboarding process, but also we're looking into actually the culture after this whole corona situation. What happens next? What is our new work concept here at finleap? Are we most likely going to have people back at the office, fully remote, some hybrid model? Of course, we need to look into that. How is our culture going to look? What does collaboration look like? What is an on-site and remote hiring process or communication process or whatever other process you need to have going to look like? So with those programs already, we were very quick to implement new things like mindfulness initiatives for people that maybe are working from home or are under lockdown and live alone and they don't have as many points of communication with others. We set up remote yoga classes, remote meditation classes. We even set up a crowd running program where people can basically run a relay together, but fully remotely. We had quite a lot of engagement with that. And of course, more platforms to talk and connect. And finally, I'd just say two more things on that one. The parents initiative for parents who are currently dealing with the situation, just a forum on our Slack channel to help them engage with each other and understand what each other are doing. And also our German classes, which is very important for people who are newly moving to Germany. We were able to move them into fully virtual classes too. So just some tips that we accumulated over the last few months. Okay, great. I love the tip about the running and mindfulness and doing yoga together. Sounds fun. I also would like to share, I just remembered a great practice I heard regarding to onboarding. One of our TalentLyft customers did this as a part of their remote onboarding. So to help their new hires get a taste of their company culture, and now you will see why I said taste. They did an online, so remote coffee and tea tasting. So what did they do? They sent a few days before, they sent a package of samples of different teas and coffees to their new hires. And then they got together online and tried it and commented and so on. And after that, the one type of tea and coffee that their new hire liked the most, they sent a bigger package to their home, along with the personalized cup with the name of their new hire and their company's logo. So I love that idea. I think it's a very nice touch. So you can do a lot of different things, just be creative, and you can still have that very personal feel, even though your new hires can be on the opposite side of the world. So it's possible. You can do a lot of interesting and cool things. So if you happen to know any other cool practice like this, please feel free to share with others in the chat. Okay, so we have now one final question. I would like to know, what do you think, Thomas, and what are your predictions about the future? And how is your company preparing? So yeah, I think actually one of these questions came up from Dimitri, if I'm pronouncing the name right. about kind of hiring globally. And I think for us, it's a question that finleap needs to come with a solution for and answer the question. We are like every other company in the world. We're competing over the best talents, and Berlin, again, is like every other city in the world. It's very competitive for the talents that are here. For our future, we ask the question, do we hire fully remotely? Is that an opportunity for us? It's not something we've done in the past. We are typically an on-site company, though we have different locations across Europe. We try to bring people always to those locations. 4 days a week is usually the minimum, but it's something that maybe we need to pivot, because we've realized in the last few months that maybe actually it doesn't matter so much. Maybe we are just as effective working from home. It would give us the opportunity to find people everywhere, but then it would also give our current employees maybe a bit more longevity at finleap, because if they ever wanted to move back home, had they already moved here, they could continue to work from finleap from any other location. And personally, I think that's a pretty cool idea. But if one employee is remote, all are remote. So we go from a no remote culture to a fully remote culture, just from having that one person working remotely, because to that person, everyone else is remote. So what do we do with those two cultures? And I think that's something else that we would need to pay attention to, and something we need to really look into. Do we create a new culture, or do we in fact create two cultures, a remote and an on-site one? And that's something which we need to dive deeper into. I think one other prediction I'd make, should we go to a fully remote space, performance management might also become pretty difficult. And we're getting more into kind of post-onboarding stage with candidates and in fact employees by that stage. But is it as easy to assess the performance of people when they sit right next to you versus another team member who maybe sits far away from you? Is it easy to do that? Or in fact, there are a lot of biases that come into there? And what do we do to try and mitigate those biases when it comes to location, FaceTime bias, that kind of thing? And of course, other things like our benefits programs might need to change, because a travel card in Berlin that we provide our employees with is not so useful if you're working fully remotely. So we thought about a lot of those things, and those questions still for us remain unanswered. I think one other thing I would go into there is employer branding. If we have something like a virtual office tour, or in fact the office tour in general, how important does your office become if someone's never going to work there? In fact, what I think we should be celebrating more of is how well we are coping with people working remotely, celebrating that kind of thing, celebrating our team with interviews, celebrating good exchanges that we've had via remote things, and doing case studies and presenting them about how our team works effectively, has team events, and build that trust from the outside that we're a company that can handle the remote culture.
Okay, great, Thomas. Thank you. Thank you for both of you for very interesting presentation. I think we can move on now to our Q&A session, because we have a lot of questions waiting for us here. So the first one here is, how do you validate the reliability of remote tests? So maybe Scott, you can share something about that with us, and also Thomas, maybe you can share your experience. So the validity of remote tests, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I think it's the validity. Yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting. So obviously this is kind of our core space. And what we do is our platform and our technology is really designed to, actually embedded in the fact that we can take data from a candidate. So a candidate will come in and essentially, perform a set of tasks based off of a test that we give them for engineering qualification, right? And we actually take that information and then we score it out in an unbiased, in a natural, organic type of way, and provide those insights around the coding, the assessment itself, and then we actually rank that based off of a particular score on how well they've actually answered those questions. And then we actually deliver that information in our platform for the recruiter and for the engineering manager to actually review and process. And so that's the validity is based off of the organic fact of the test itself. But we've also heard there's instances around, hey, there might be folks out there that that might be might not be as transparent, might actually potentially try to cheat. And so we have a lot of safeguards that we put in place over the last 10 or 12 years that we've been in business to make sure that there is honesty and integrity in the test, and that we can supply that back through our technology. And so I think that using our technology in a way that is honest, open, transparent, providing validity through the types of tasks and tests that we give our throughout our customers, and then also backing that through the ability of finding transparency through that process is kind of what we do. So it's kind of a holistic way that we do it, but it ultimately those are kind of the different ways that we tackle that. So
okay, great, thank you. Now I have a question for Thomas. You talked about nonverbal communication. So do you have any more tips on how to evaluate nonverbal communication in a digital interview process?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and something that I think a lot of companies are thinking about. And I think before you try and answer that question, you need to consider whether this person will in fact be an on-site employee with you, because if you have someone sitting next to you, then sure, you might need some good non-verbal communication skills. But if this person is always going to be remote, then in fact their ability to interview fully digitally and do that well is almost enough. You can say that they will be in a call with you afterwards and doing that effectively. I think realistically, it's unfair to judge people on how they are in real life and try and make an assumption for how they'd be in real life just through a video. That's my personal opinion. If you're really trying to see, will this person be good to have around, someone who's good to have in a group discussion, that kind of thing. Again, it's really hard to judge. But one thing you can always do is see how these people, for example, handle feedback. If you're doing a process where they're needing to present something to you or assess themselves in some way, and you ask them to feedback, perhaps challenge them in a way that you will see, not an emotional response, sounds a bit strong, but see in a way how they react, maybe facially. And again, I mentioned before, your face is everything. The way that you communicate, your tone of voice. I would look more into those aspects and the way people present themselves like that than I would into the usual triggers for nonverbal communication that you'd have if you're meeting someone face to face.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here is another question. How many steps do you have in your interview process? So how many steps? We heard that you double the time of your interviews. And did you maybe put in some extra steps in your hiring process as well? So
we made some longer. Typically, that's not our intention. Usually we try and make them as fast as possible, but that intention obviously is to make the most of time that we can spend with people. What we have done in some cases with companies or that we have in our ecosystem where maybe their employer brand isn't super obvious, or they're quite a new company and there just isn't a lot of content out there, is introduce what I know quite a few other companies do, to have interviewers who aren't part of the typical team. So if it's an engineer, for example, they won't speak to the engineering team the whole process. Maybe they'll speak to the marketing team or the sales team, just to get a cross-reference from across the company, the wider organization, of what total culture will look like, because there's probably a micro culture within each of those individual teams. And for us, that's been a key step. I think the technical evaluations, again, it's something that we're getting more comprehensive and including with more and more of our roles. And that's something we've also learned through this remote work is really, really powerful, and something that I would suggest that everyone uses, whether it's Codility or anything else that will assess other skills. It's highly, highly recommended to have a better benchmark to go into an interview with to make the most of it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here's a very interesting question. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on this. Do you think that remote work will change cost of labor as it becomes more global and you can source people from different geographic locations without any problem? So this is a very hot topic and debate right now at the moment. So I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on this.
Scott, would you like to go first? I'm happy to as well.
Yeah. So I think that is kind of a hot topic, and I think the short answer to that is we don't know right now. I think it is going to kind of revolutionize the market in a lot of ways, right? And so, if, for instance, I live in the Bay Area where the cost of living is significantly higher than other places across the country, and so the challenge is like, oh, if we're going fully remote, maybe it's advantageous for me to actually pick up and live in an area where, I could take take a salary that is, greater than where I'm living now, and then maybe move to an area where the cost of living is significantly lower. And that I think there's a lot of groundswell about some of those questions actually popping up right now, and it's really interesting too. So I think there's a lot to be answered for that still. I think some organizations are starting to think through what that might look like. I know employees are really curious about it as well. I see potentially one way of solving for that is maybe doing some sort of unifying benchmarking and having some sort of common average around using data of cost of living averages and mapping that to salaries. And it might be complex and complicated, and it probably is, but that might be a place to start. But I think the long term of this is there's probably a lot more information that needs to be had before I think kind of folks start really digging into that. So
this is also, I believe, a very interesting question. What I did was to look up to some of the companies who have worked remotely since they've been founded. So, for example, Buffer, GitHub, Zapier, and many other similar companies. And how they handle this situation. So they adjust their pace regarding to the cost of living of their hires. So this is one model that's been very popular, and it seems to work. So of course, many different models are possible, and we will see what will happen. I agree with you, Scott. There is no way of knowing at the moment, but we definitely live in a very interesting time, so we will see what happens. Okay, so we have still one question here, I think. Okay, steps in the hiring process. Is there application, then video screening, then hiring manager interview, and then team interview? Is this your process that you have in place?
It can vary, to be honest, and I see. Okay. Emily wrote that question and then wrote assessment afterwards, and maybe you're wondering where the assessment kind of fills into that. Yeah. I think I still feel it's very important, even though Scott mentioned about reducing the recruiter call or the first phone screen. It's really important to at least be able to set the scene and give the candidate a lot more information than they maybe got from a job description or online. So we still definitely do that call after the application. We often would do a hiring manager call, especially if we think a candidate would be maybe in a few different processes, still not entirely convinced that this is the right place for them. Introduce that hiring manager call, give them some face time with the person who they will actually be working with, who can really give them a deeper insight into what it's like to work there and the kind of opportunities that they have. And pretty much there is where I would suggest adding in the assessment stage, because you want to be able to touch back onto that assessment in what we would have as like a final interview, where we'd also include the team interview. And for example, with leadership assessments, we have a leadership interview in particular, and now we have that assessment. You can go in there with some information already from the self-assessment to pick on and to really focus on when you're in that interview. And I would do the same with the tech screening with Codility or any other assessment that we do. It's the worst thing to put someone through a whole process, then you ask them to do your self-assessment, it doesn't go to plan, and you've wasted everyone's time. So that's why I would very much introduce it as early into this the process as possible, and then use it as evidence or as a piece of evidence throughout the process for the rest of it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, who do you put on your interview team? Just came in, so you can just shortly answer that one as well, and after that we'll be closing.
It's a big question because it depends on what type of role. To keep it as simple as possible, we typically have a recruiter, a hiring manager, one or two people to share an interview who's within that team, and then currently more of those cultural fit interviewers who would be outside of the team, and we'd probably introduce those in duos as well. So something like that as our panel. Okay, great, thank you. We've come to the end of our webinar, and now I want to share the results of the poll with you. So
let me see, more than 100 of you answered the poll, and these are the results. Only 3% of you said that you would like to work from the office. 27% want to continue working remotely, and 52% want to combine office and remote work occasionally. So again, we are hearing this stats that remote work definitely seems to be here to stay. So, and remote hiring as well. So I hope you learned something new and useful in this webinar. If you have any more questions, feel free to contact us. Scott, Thomas, me, you will get a webinar recording. You have our contacts there. You can also find all of us on LinkedIn. So feel free to drop us a note, ask anything. We'll be happy to share some more examples and tips with you. Thank you, everyone. You were a wonderful audience. Thank you for your great feedback, your kind comments, and see you again. We have another webinar coming up next month, of course, but you will get information about that. So follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter so we can see you again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Thomas and Scott. Thank you for joining us, and see you, everyone, soon again.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.